안녕하세요. 여러분의 한국어 선생님 고빌리입니다. Welcome to the sixth part of my analysis series where I look at the 8-member group Stray Kids. If you're seeing me for the first time, well, I'm a Korean teacher. I've been studying Korean for the past 2 decades and teaching it here on YouTube for over 13 years. And in the last video in this series, we took an in-depth look at Han. So today I'm going to be introducing you to Felix.
Excuse me, sir. Do you have time, please?
Yeah, sure, no worries, mate.
Would you please care to introduce yourself?
Sure. G'day, mate. My name's Felix. Nice to meet you.
So I'm going to analyze how his Korean sounds overall, including his voice tone, his pronunciation, any filler words or unique expressions that he uses. He has a few, as well as take a look at his handwriting. And if you don't already speak Korean, these are things that you're definitely missing out on. But before I do any of that, I first need to say thanks to my Patreon supporters for literally keeping the lights on in this room, because I'm just one person who teaches Korean. So if you're able to join my Patreon page, it really makes a big difference to help me to keep making more content like this, as well as my regular Korean lessons here on this channel. So please check out my Patreon page. It's patreon.com/GoBillyKorean and support me if you can. And I know by now you know what's coming, but I still have to pay my electricity bill somehow. So I would like to introduce you to my textbook series for learning Korean called Korean Made Simple, which I wrote specifically for self-study learners, so you can use it without having a class or a tutor. Now, if you want to start learning Korean, but you really don't know where to start, my book series goes from the very beginning up to an intermediate level, so that should be enough for having real conversations. It also includes notes about culture, history, as well as food and a lot of other cool things. All 3 textbooks and all 3 workbooks also come with audio files for all of the conversations, which you can download from my website. There is a link to get the first book in the video description below, so get your copy today and start learning Korean. That is really hard to hold on my shoulder. So now let's get into my full analysis of Felix, or Felix, whose Korean name is yong-bok.
안녕하십니까. 스트레이 키즈 필릭스라고 합니다.
Okay, so Felix was born in 2000 in Sydney, Australia, where just like Bangchan, he also grew up speaking mainly English as well as some Korean at home. And I need to say this again, but there is a really common misconception that children who grow up outside of Korea but with Korean parents will still automatically speak fluent Korean, and this is mostly incorrect. And in fact, most Koreans I've seen who grew up outside of Korea, once they become adults, they're not able to speak Korean fluently unless they were somehow able to get constant daily practice while growing up. Most people can't. So although Felix is Korean, because he grew up in Australia, his native language is actually English, which would be the language that he used every day, most of the time at school. However, although both Bangchan and Felix both have similar origin stories, their speaking sounds extremely different, and I don't really want to be comparing them to each other constantly in this video.
뭔가 사람 없고 그런 느낌. 버려진 느낌.
His face though.
Stray Kids.
I graded both of their Korean anyway back in 2021, so much has changed since then. In Stray Kids, Felix is the main dancer along with Lino and Hyunjin, and he's also a part of the rap line. Before debuting with Stray Kids, Felix did taekwondo in Australia for 12 years and also competed and has a black belt. Now, in Korea, taking taekwondo class is pretty much kind of like after-school daycare, so a lot of kids do it. My kid also does it whenever he's in Korea, but he was outside of Korea, and not just that, but he also went for a black belt and then entered and won many competitions, which shows me that he actually had a talent for it. And I have no doubt that taking those classes is also something that helped him a lot to master dancing. So before I go in depth about his speech, let me just talk a bit about my first impressions. In my opinion, Felix stands out to me the most in the whole group, partially because he grew up outside of Korea, but also because he's just a goofball with everyone.
자, 내가 브론즈라고 한마디 한번 해봐.
야, yong-bok.
씨, 애기야. 간다!
야, 지야. 하나, 둘, 셋, 넷.
He always seems like he's having the most fun, and he enjoys making the others laugh with him. In fact, he has a Korean nickname that you might not know, which is 행복이, and means happy. That's because his Korean name, yong-bok, is sometimes shortened to just bok, which would be 복이, 복이, when used in a sentence with the subject marker. And the word 행복 means happiness, so 행복이. And I think it's a great nickname. And something else you might not know about his name is that he often uses it as a sentence ending in Korean. Now, in Korean, the common verb ending yo can sometimes be written with an iung, the circle letter at the bottom, as yong in order to sound cute. So sometimes in Korean, Felix will attach yong-bok이 to the end of his sentences. Like instead of writing 사랑해요, I love you, he could write 사랑해 용복이, 사랑해 용복이. I mean, you shouldn't go around writing that, or maybe put it in a letter to Felix. But besides being overall happy most of the time, he also just seems like, to me, like a really kind and generous person. I mean, he baked cookies for staff members who you never even see appear on camera. He's given gifts to other members before when they're not filming. But these sorts of things, although he does them off camera a lot, they don't go unnoticed. And here's a clip actually of Hyunjin talking about him.
너 그 봉사하러 간 데 있잖아.
라오스.
그거 보면서 진짜 대단하다고 생각했어. 라오스 가는 거 보면서. 그러니까
왜?
나도 널 보면서 너는 약간 베푸는 거에 그 어떠한 의미를 부여하지 않는 사람인 것 같아. 그냥 진짜 너의 마음이 시키는 대로 하는 것들이 항상 다 좋은 일들이야. 막 너가 라오스 가가지고 막 봉사하고 막 어린 아이들들 막 이렇게 해주는 거 보면서 와 이게 진짜 멋있는 사람의 표본이구나를 느꼈어.
And Felix, I also noticed he's not afraid to like share his emotions either, both when he's happy and when he's sad. And to me, that makes him feel really grounded and feel like authentic as a person. Okay, so those are my first impressions of him. So then how does he speak Korean? This is the main part of the video. Well, just like Bangtan, remember, Felix also lived outside of Korea and grew up speaking in English. He lived in Australia all the way until he was nearly 17 when he was casted by JYP Entertainment. And so when he was on the survival show, he wasn't able to speak or understand that much Korean.
안녕하세요, 필릭스입니다.
필릭스?
네, 필릭스.
외국에서 왔어?
네?
외국에서 왔어?
네, 저 호주에서 왔어요.
호주에서?
네.
언제 왔어? 언제 왔어? 너 맞을래?
저는 2개월에 왔어요.
아, 2개월 전에 왔어. 아직 한국말 서툴구나.
네네.
아, 잘생겼다. 몇 살이니? 몇 살이야? How old are you?
Poor Felix.
호주 나이로 저는 17살이에요.
알겠습니다. 더 이상 말 붙이면 안 될 것 같아요.
Now, although he's able to say a few things in Korean already, which was from, growing up with Korean parents, I wouldn't really say at this point he speaks Korean, and he's not even able to understand the simple questions that are being asked. And besides that, though, he also makes a few mistakes in his answers. He says, like, 2개월에 왔어요, when he should have said something like 2월에 왔어요, meaning I came here in February.
저는 2개월에 왔어요.
But I do want to say this again, especially for Koreans who grew up in other countries and might feel discouraged if they can't speak Korean well. Him speaking like this is actually the norm. It was not his fault for not speaking Korean fluently by this point. Obviously, he didn't grow up speaking Korean the whole time. However, what is not the norm is what he chose to do in this situation, because instead of just giving up or even just trying to float by and stay quiet, not use his Korean, he fully locked in and studied the hell out of Korean.
좀 있으면 5시 30분입니다.
할 수 있어. 방금 제가 한국어 책을 끝났어요.
And being a Korean teacher, it's hard to express how proud I feel of him, because I know also firsthand how difficult it can be trying to learn Korean. But he did all of this while still taking care of his dance practice, singing training, and while being under the stress of being eliminated from the group. And yes, he was eliminated from the survival show because I think mainly because of his Korean, which I want to talk about first.
그거보다 더 큰 문제는 한국말을 네가 잘 못하잖아. 그러니까 이게 랩할 때 그게 말하는 것처럼 들리지 않아.
So although he had a head start from having Korean parents, besides that, he learned most of the Korean he knows after arriving in Korea. He had learned some of the basics growing up, and his pronunciation actually sounded pretty good. But otherwise, he had to learn Korean the same way that you or I would learn it, just by studying and practicing and by making a lot of mistakes. And in my research, I learned that the reason was although he had Korean parents, he wasn't only using Korean at home. Typically, the family would use what's known as Konglish, a kind of mix of Korean and English words, where his parents might speak to him in Korean sometimes, but then he would simply reply back in English. So he would have been able to understand some basic sentences, but not make them naturally himself. And while Bangchan, on the other hand, had a similar situation, remember that he also moved to Korea several years before Felix and at a much younger age. So they're not really comparable. And I won't get too much into what Felix's Korean used to sound like when he first arrived in Korea. I already kind of covered that in my last video anyway. But I want to focus here on how his Korean has improved since then, because it has improved so much. I mean, first of all, compared with 2017, it's night and day. So let's talk about how. First, here's a clip that I actually used in my last analysis video of him back in, this clip was from 2020. And let's check that out first.
애교는 전 진짜 잘 모르겠어요. 카메라 앞에서 애교를 하는 자체가 약간 되게 어색하거든요. 저는 제 자기만의 모습은 잘 모르는 것 같아요. 그래서 뭐 애교를 하는 거나 아니면 진짜 잘 모르겠어요. 애교도 뭔지도 정확하게 잘 모르겠어요. 뭔가 멤버들이랑 이제 매일매일 이제 또 같이 또 이제 숙소 생활도 하고 같이 밥도 먹고 같이 땀도 나고 그래서 뭔가 멤버들한테 더 애교를 많이 한 것 같아요. 그래서 멤버들이 아마 알 것 같아요. 만약에 내가 애교가 있는지 없는지 많은지 안 많은지.
He sounds way smoother than 2017. I mean, this time he's actually speaking Korean and in full sentences. But not just his pronunciation, which sounds fluent here, but his intonation as well has gotten really smooth. And more noticeably than that to me is actually not really to do with his Korean especially, but he just sounds confident. Another thing that also helps is his voice got deeper. And I talked about a lot of that in my last video as well. So let's look at a different clip though from a live stream that he did that same year where he talks about what type of vegetable he dislikes.
릭스 싫어하는 채소 있나요?
싫어하는 채소가 있나? 저는
싫어하는 채소보단 채소를 그냥 그대로 먹으면 되게 싫거든요. 약간 몇 개 예를 들면 언년 있잖아요. 막 그런 것들 막 그냥 그대로 먹으면 못 먹어요. 저는 그냥 구워서 무조건 채소를 굽거나 아니면 소스를 뿌려서 먹는 게 제일 맛있지 않을까 싶어서.
So now this video isn't edited at all, so you can really hear him figuring out what he wants to say in real time. And there are a few mistakes, like he says onion, which is just Konglish instead of the word 양파 for onion. But still, overall, he sounds way better than he did when we first heard his Korean. And his pronunciation is a lot more natural and smooth. I also noticed some of his Korean expressions from back then were more Felix style. And here's a note, this is kind of a funny example, that I found he'd written to a restaurant owner where he wrote, 이 식당은 진심으로 하늘이에요. Meaning, this restaurant is 하늘, is heaven, literally. But the word that he used here, 하늘, means more like the sky, like the heavens. I mean, it still sounds cute and anyone would understand it. Now that clip, again, was 3 years or so after he had first moved to Korea. So let's go several years ahead. This was last year in 2025 and hear what he sounds like.
뭐 많이 구매하거나 많이 사면 어쨌든 놀 데가 없고 그러다 보니까 이렇게 사는 게 맞긴 해. 그래서 나도 그냥 널 그냥 따라가. 그래야 같이 오래 살 수 있는 거잖아.
Compared with, 2020, 2021, around there, it's significantly smoother. It does not anymore sound like he's doing any sort of like translation in his head. It just sounds like he's very comfortable speaking in Korean. And did you also notice that he got a lot faster? Here's another example of how fast he can speak now where he's talking about playing video games.
주먹으로 날리나 아니면 다리로 날리나 그래서 이걸 하단으로 막아야 되나 하단으로 먼저 때리고 그다음 기회다 애니 같은 순간들이 되게 많아요. 죽기 전에 누가 먼저 때리냐 슬로우 모션이 이제 건단 말이에요. 볼 때마다 약간 도파민이 확 올라오고 멤버들이랑 같이 철권하면 진짜 그런 순간이 되게 많아요. 뭐 우와 이거 진짜 되게 신나고 잔인하게 이 사람을 이기고 싶다라는 마음이 커진 것 같아요.
He's gotten really fast. In fact, his Korean sounds so good now that I could just end the video here and move on to Seungmin because he doesn't need to rely on Konglish. He's not going to have any difficulty using Korean anymore, which is fantastic. But I know that you're watching this video because you still want to know exactly how he sounds. So, unlike my last video, this time I'm going to have to be much more nitpicky to find any Korean mistakes. But first, in summary, now he sounds mostly like a native speaker, but there are still some hints that tell me that he's a Korean learner because I can see things that he does which I see other learners do, or even things that I do. First, he will occasionally make small pronunciation mistakes, and the most common one that I found recently was when he pronounces the consonant iung, which is the circle letter. Now, this letter is normally silent at the start of a syllable, but when it's at the end of a syllable, it's pronounced as ng, kind of like in the word song in English, like ng. But perhaps due to him being Australian, he sometimes pronounces this at the end of a word as just an N sound. And here's an example of him doing this while trying to pronounce the word 상징.
상징,
상진
상징.
And you can also hear it a few times in this next clip, such as where he says the word 항상, meaning always. It kind of sounds like he's saying 항상. And you can hear it again when he also says the word 정말. It's almost like 전말.
근데 너가 옆에서 항상 말해주고 그리고 아는 게 되게 많으니까 불편하게 알려주지 않고 억지로 알려주지 않잖아. 너가 정말 진심으로.
And this is something I would expect to see from a Korean learner, so it didn't surprise me. And I guarantee if he's watching this video now he's not, but just in case, hey Felix, great job! All he would need to do to fix this would be just focus on that one letter, just pronounce it a tad louder, especially when it's between syllables, and I would say that the rest of his pronunciation is all flawless. Now, I did find some other examples of mispronouncing things, but it wasn't for a specific letter, just things in general. Like in this clip where he pronounces the word 오랜만에, which means in or after a long time, and he says this as 오랜만에, so he's missing the bottom letter.
그래서 좀 긴장되는데 오랜만에 이렇게 나와서
But mostly the mistakes I found him making weren't mispronunciation. They were just the kind of mistakes that would happen simply because you haven't yet learned a word. And these are the kind of mistakes that most advanced speakers will still deal with for years. And it just takes time to get over them. Like in this clip I found where he didn't know the word 철, which is a word that gets added onto other words and means like a season or a time for something.
우리는 9월이 생일 철이잖아.
생일 철?
생일이 엄청 많은 약간 이벤트 기간이잖아, 9월.
그치.
Or like in this clip where he wasn't able to remember how to say shy, the best way for that. So he says that Lino literally has shyness, but it would have been more natural to say something like he is very shy.
난 장난스럽게 하고 니노 형은 좀 수줍은 있는 것 같아요.
Or in this clip where he's not familiar with the idiom 외유내강, which is originally a Chinese idiom that means someone is kind or soft on the outside, but tough and strong on the inside. And I'd say that most native Korean speakers would know this idiom.
두 사람도 약간 외유내강이라는 말이 잘 어울리는 이미지인데.
It means 이제 inside가 strong이고
인사이드가 스트롱.
외유내강 is inside strong, outside soft. soft.
And the only reason that I know this expression is because it was in a Chinese idiom book that I specifically bought and studied in order to learn Chinese idioms. But it's not something that most Korean learners would ever need to know or ever use. So I won't take off any points for it. I just wanted to use this example to show that the Korean Felix knows is all Korean that he learned completely by himself. Felix, if you're watching, this is all your hard work. In fact, even when he makes mistakes, he doesn't sound or look like he made a mistake. He's not stuttering or switching back to English or anything. He just confidently keeps going. So he's really quick on his feet. Like, I have a clip here where he didn't know the word 저음, which means a low-pitched sound, referring to his voice. And even though Felix didn't know that word, he immediately picks up on what Changbin is saying and plays along with him.
아, 용보가 그 어제 라이브 하는 댓글에 남자가 저음일수록 바람둥이일 확률이 높다는데
바람둥이가 뭐?
남자가 저음일수록 목소리가 낮을수록 바람둥이일 확률이 높다는데 아 진짜? 너는 어떻게 바람둥이야? 영복이 바람둥이래 영복아 너 바람둥이야? 아 영복이는 바람둥이가 아닌가 보다.
Yeah, Felix still occasionally makes mistakes, but the mistakes don't make him. That sounds cool, right? Anyway, so those were some of his mistakes, but now is the part where I want to show off his Korean a bit, because as a Korean teacher, I really want to put a spotlight on just how good his Korean is now. So first, I wanted to point out his vocabulary, and Felix knows tons of legitimately high-level words, which you typically won't learn unless you're already fluent, such as this one.
그리고 스테이 동사 필요하면 오히려 좋아요.
He used the word 오히려, which is an adverb that means rather, like when you'd rather do something than something else, or if something is like contrary to what you expected. And this is more advanced than the more common adverb 차라리, which also means rather, because 오히려 is specifically used for like positive meanings, whereas 차라리 is used for more often negative meanings. And I often see learners use 차라리 for both positive and negative meanings, which is correct too, but 오히려 sounds a bit better in those situations with how he's using it. So I think it sounds a little bit more advanced, and he's able to use this word very naturally.
그만큼 내가 고마워 오히려. 너가 농담을 많이 하고 장난칠 때가 많지. 사실 나 말하는 게 많이 죽었다고 해야 되나? 많이 말 안 하고 그냥 보통 들어요. 그게 오히려 저는 이제 그게 더 재미가 느낀 것 같아요.
He also uses another good word, 심지어, which means like to make matters worse. And while I wouldn't say this word is especially high level, it's just another word that you have to already be comfortable speaking Korean to use it naturally.
니콜라 선생님이, 니콜라 형님이 꽃을 보내주셨어. 와, 너무 예뻐요. 니콜라 형이 꽃을 심지어 2개를 보내준 거야.
Now, it's not just me who's noticed that he has a high level of vocabulary. The other members also noticed that. And I have a clip here of Lino actually telling Felix that he thinks that there have been a lot of times when Felix will pick better words, like more abstract words, than even the other native Korean-speaking members.
그래서 나 많이 늘었어?
엄청 많이 늘었어. 그냥 가끔 우리보다 좋은 단어를 선택해서 말할 때가 더 많아.
아 진짜?
예쁘다, 멋있다 그러는데 너는 아름답다, 행복해 막 이런 추상적인 단어를 많이 쓰는 것 같아.
Here he says, like, instead of the expressions 예쁘다, meaning pretty, or 멋있다, meaning cool, which are really common, Felix will choose expressions like 아름답다, meaning beautiful, or 행복해, like I'm happy, which are more descriptive and I think more clearly express his opinions. And to top it all off, not only can Felix speak fluently and eloquently in everyday situations, but he can also do it when he's presenting things, like giving an announcement or speaking. And that uses a different style of speaking. It's more standard intonation and formal speech. And I have a clip of that here.
여러분 스탑 끝. 여러분 우리 지금 메이크업쌤이 여기 와주셨는데요. 얼마나 예쁘게 입술을 발랐는지 일단 평가하러 왔습니다. 그래서 일단 한 명씩 평가를 해보고 있습니다.
Notice the ending of his sentences. He uses the 니다 form, like when he says 왔습니다 and 해보겠습니다, which is a formal ending, and it's useful for a lot of situations, one of which is when you're giving speeches or presenting something. And this is actually one of the first forms that I like to teach people who are learning Korean, not because it's the most common form, it's actually not that common in regular speech, but because it sounds very polite. And in Korean culture, it's much better to sound a little bit too polite than to sound a little bit too casual. Anyway, this form is also useful in several other situations as well. It's a part of a lot of common expressions, but Felix switches to using that form along with a more like official sounding flat type of intonation, which you'll hear Koreans use when they're giving like a presentation. And he does all this without really thinking about it, I think. Speaking of which, let's listen to that intonation one more time, and I'll show it a bit more emphasized so that you can kind of see how it's going up and down.
우리 메이크업쌤이 여기 와주셨는데요. 얼마나 예쁘게 입술을 발랐는지 일단 평가하러 왔습니다.
This sort of intonation where it goes up at the start and then it slowly goes downward for each part is more for presenting something, and it's not how you're going to speak with your friends since it sounds pretty flat. But it just shows to me that Felix is comfortable in all sorts of situations using Korean, not just speaking with the other members, but also even formal speech, and he sounds really smooth here. So I don't think he would have a problem using Korean in any situation.
Hey, no problem, eh?
So then if you're watching this video and wondering how you can improve your Korean, then I have some advice for you. Actually, I think Felix can give you some good advice himself.
Felix, any tips for learning Korean? Will it be hard? I can't say everything's easy at first. I don't know. Maybe there are some people that find it be able to handle easily, and so that's natural. And I learned to accept that I am a slow learner, but also very cautious and willing to make every aspect a bit more perfect. So yeah, the best it can be. So how to improve your Korean? Honestly, just take it easy. Don't stress yourself with with how hard the pronunciation is, or like just do it slow. I'll try to not too fast. Just take your time. If you want to take a break, take a break. Like don't force yourself to do it if you feel like tired or if it's too hard for you. Yeah, no need to stress. Take your time. You still have time. That's why there's time.
Again, it's awesome seeing how much Felix has accomplished since he started. And maybe in another 5 years or so down the line, I'll be seeing him again. Or maybe he'll be analyzing my Korean in one of his own videos. Who knows?
Hey, my rule. 이렇게 나왔어.
So that's enough about his Korean learning, but I still want to talk a little bit more about how he sounds overall, specifically his low voice. Now, fans already know this better than I do, but Felix's voice is one of the things that I see people commenting online the most, and all agree. He has a low voice that sounds pleasant to listen to in both English and Korean.
겨울이니까 겨울 기분에 새로 나온 모자입니다. 겨울 시즌. 딱 날씨가 엄청 춥대요, 일본은. 그래서 딱 쓰기가 좋아요. 그래서 빨리 무대에 쓰고 싶습니다. 감사합니다.
And together with his smooth-sounding Korean would make a good combination for something like ASMR.
It's time for a bedtime story. 재밌게 들어주시면 될 것 같습니다.
I also know that some of you are wondering whether or not Felix's Australian accent ever creeps into his Korean. And yes, sometimes it does, but not much. Sometimes I found that it was intentional, like if he's just making a joke, and other times it seems to me to be unintentional. Like in this clip here, he says the word nice, meaning nice. And the first time he pronounces it in Korean as nice, and the second time he says it in English as nice. And in both, I can hear some of his Australian intonation.
오, 나이스. 나이스.
And here's another example where he pronounces the word 필, or also 빌, which comes from the English word feel and is used to say like, I get the feeling that. But he says it here with a softer sound, almost like an F, which makes it sound like English.
벌써 건강해진 필이야.
And it might have also been a bit intentional. I can't really tell, but you can hear it a little bit in some cases. Now, those are all really nitpicky though, and most of the time he's not using any Australian English when he's speaking in Korean. He's just speaking in Korean. And any times where I would hear his accent were simply because he had switched from using Korean to English in the middle of a sentence.
오늘도 very nice. Very nice.
Or occasionally his Australian accent wouldn't be in the words he's using, but it'll be in his intonation. Like if he gets excited, you might hear him add extra ups and downs to his words. Like in this short clip where he says, 깜짝 놀랐어. And his pronunciation here is perfect, but the intonation sounds like it came from his English.
그날부터 계속 먹고 있는 거 아니야 지금까지.
깜짝 놀랐어. 아이 무슨 형이. 깜짝 놀랐어. 아이 무슨 형이. 깜짝 놀랐어. 아이 무슨 형이.
But this doesn't happen much. It's really just me being extra picky for this video, which has already gone on really long. But can you tell I'm really excited to talk about Felix? Anyway, let's talk though about his usage of filler words. Filler words are just words that are used to fill space, like 좀, 진짜, 막, 되게, etc. So then, which filler words does Felix use? All of them. Felix is the best member to learn filler words from, so much that it would be faster for me to tell you which filler words he doesn't use. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. He's not like overusing filler words. And trust me, I do know some people who do that. But here are some of the ones to look out for, especially starting with 좀.
라는 게 좀 실감이 안 난다고 해야 되나? 좀 실감이 안 나고 따로 있죠. 좀 또 미안한 마음도 있더라고요. 그러니까 자주 스테이한테 인사를 못 해줘서 좀 정신없거나 좀 멀티가 안 돼서 생각보다 생각 좀 깊은 좀 요새 좀 생각이 얘가 이제 좀 키보드 뭐 영상 예를 들면 ASMR 그런 키보드 거 있잖아요. 뭐 잠 못 자거나 좀 약간 불면증 있거나 아니면 좀 자고 싶은데 사실 저는 개인적으로 좀 이상한데 그런 이미지 좀 뭐라고 할까 좀 새로운 게 좀 많을 거예요.
좀 means a little, and it's useful for softening a sentence, which Felix likes to do because it can make his sentences sound a little bit more polite just by adding this one filler word. But there's another filler word Felix likes to use which also softens sentences, and he uses this a little bit more. So try to guess from these next clips.
근데 뭔가 약간 그러니까 예를 들면 피곤하면 약간 좀 뭐지 약간 신기한데 아직 그 안에 초콜릿 조금 약간
아직도 약간 좀 살아남아 있다 색이 네, 많이 밝아졌어요. 그래서 이제 약간 밝은 파랑 하트 요새 또 왜 없지? 약간 이런 생각이 들었는데 약간 네 틱톡에서 약간 많이 들어본 노래도 많고 그리고 약간 비하인드가 되게 많아요. 그래서 이거는 약간 하이보의 노래인데 약간 카페에서 약간 피곤하잖아요. 좀 지치고 좀 약간 힘을 내야 되는데 근데 저는 약간 밥을 스타일 되게 좋았어요. 좀 세련된 좀 새로운 약간 힘이 나는 그런 패션이었 약간 그 옷들이 많았어요. 보면 약간 자신감 생길 것 같은 그런 옷들이 많아가지고 근데 뭔가 안 있는 것 같아요. 그래서 혹시나 약간 그러면 믿는 건가? 귀신이 있는 것 같은 약간 귀신이 있는 거는 믿는데
The word's 약간, if you didn't notice, and I had to stop getting clips for this because he was using it so much, but it means somewhat or kinda. Okay, now for the next one. These are a few filler words that he uses to exaggerate things, and they are 진짜, which means really, 너무, which means too much or so much, and 막, which means like.
진짜 너무 고맙고 진짜 오늘 너무 좋은 하루였습니다. 그래도 오늘 진짜 너무 고맙고 해피 버스데이 막 이렇게 이렇게 막 내려오네요. 이렇게 막 이렇게 안고 있는데 다리도 길고 키도 진짜 키 크신데 막 이렇게 막 되게 멋있어요. 이렇게 막 얘기도 하고 와 진짜 너무 멋있어가지고.
He also likes using filler words that help him to describe things like 이제, which means now or so now, and 이렇게, which means this or like this.
왜 나 어렸을 때 막 한국 가기 전에 봉사활동 하려고 했었는데 내 딱 부른 거야. 이제
제가 워낙 좀 요새 좀 생각이 얘가 이제 스테이가 잘 모르겠지만 쟤 잘 알겠지. 기부하는 것도 하고 싶은 마음도 크고 근데 이제 워낙 봉사활동도 많이 못하다 보니까 올해는 좀 이제 라오스 가서 이제 봉사활동하러 가는 것도 그리고 한국에 이제 국내인 이제 우리 아이들한테도 포근하고 스테이가 이제 스테이홈이라고 표현하면 양치하다가 이제 스트레칭 하고 싶은데 입는 거는 이제 끊기지 않는다. 이제 끊으면 이제 냉부. 냉부 재밌게 촬영했어요. 너무 다들 왜 이렇게 스윗해요? 이렇게 스윗한 메시지, 이렇게 아주 따뜻한 메시지를 주네요. 이렇게 거의 아침밥만 먹고 이렇게 먹게 되니까.
So yes, he uses a lot of filler words. Okay. Okay, before we go, I want to take a quick look at his handwriting, and I was especially curious to see Felix's handwriting because technically he's a Korean learner, so there are going to be a few things that I'm specifically looking for. And there are 3 examples I want to share, and the first example is a note that he wrote to Lino.
파이팅, 멋져.
Right away, I see traits of a Korean learner, which is really cool to me. Mainly, I can see that he writes all of his letters perfectly. It's kind of funny that writing it perfectly makes it stand out as a Korean learner. But look at how he writes the consonant lir, the L letter, as 3 separate strokes, which is the correct way, and not just as one curvy line like how most people write it. Now, a lot of native Korean speakers will do that too, but he also writes all of his letters the correct way. Even the consonant biup, which is the B letter, he writes it as 4 separate strokes, when pretty much all the time it's just written with 2 for handwriting. But actually what stands out more than having perfect stroke order to me is the size of some of his syllables. I can tell that while Felix has had a tremendous amount of practice listening to Korean and speaking it in a large variety of situations, he probably hasn't done that much practice yet writing it. And I can see this here in the word 고맙다, where the middle syllable is much bigger than the other 2 around it, or at the end in the word 화이팅, the consonant at the bottom, the iung, the circle letter, is a lot larger than it should be. But that's okay, because the Korean that he actually wrote here is perfect and it sounds really friendly. He wrote the letter starting with Lino-chan, which is kind of like Japanese, Lino-chan. And he says thanks to him for being by his side throughout the year, and then says he's going to do the same thing for him. And he also uses a good word here, 늘, meaning always, which I see a lot of beginners misuse because this word 늘 is only supposed to be used to mean always in writing, specifically like poetry and lyrics. So Felix is actually using it here perfectly. Let's see another note then. This time is a note to Seungmin.
Thank you, bro. 너무 좋아.
Same thing here, but you can clearly see where he's pressing his marker down. So I can see where he did the actual strokes, which is cool. And it tells me that he is writing rather slowly. The reason I can tell this is because I don't see any flicks at the end of his letters, which is something that people will have to do when they're writing more quickly. And this is, again, it's not a problem. It just means that all he has to do to fix the size of some of his letters that we see is to practice writing more quickly. I think those will naturally get better. Okay, one more note I want to look at, and this is one that he wrote to Hyunjin.
포장을 하자.
This is the best of the 3 notes, and whatever he did here, he should keep doing that. His letters are here mostly the same size, and overall it looks a lot cleaner. But I will say that if you're a beginner and you want some reading practice, Felix's letters are probably your best choice because not only will you learn some useful Korean, but his writing is going to be the easiest to read since he follows the stroke order of each letter perfectly. Okay, and I could keep going on and on about Felix, of course, but there are still 2 more members to analyze, so I think that's enough for today.
Make it right. Make it right. 하고 딱.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to my channel for more Korean language content. Thanks again to my Patreon supporters and my YouTube channel members for making this series possible. Please check out my Patreon page in the video description if you'd like to help support my channel. And you can also get some cool benefits like Korean cheat sheets, study guides, vocabulary decks, and more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next episode. 그럼 다음에 또 봐.